You're listening to the Ocean Current, Private Ocean Wealth Management's podcast series. Each episode, get up close and personal with experienced financial professionals and subject matter experts to get insights to some of your most pressing financial and investment planning questions. Welcome to Personal and Powerful Wealth Management.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Ocean Current. I'm your host, Cynthia Greenfield. Today's topic is real estate, specifically in San Francisco. We've gotten some mixed messages about the real estate market within the past year, but this has tended to be a bit of a misnomer. What we've seen is a surge in sales volume since the second half of 2020, with December hitting its highest point ever for sales volume and January home sales up 67% from the previous year. The city remains a very complex market that varies by property type. Homes versus condos, for instance, price segment, and of course, by neighborhood. So what does this mean for the potential buyer and sellers? What should buyers and sellers discuss with their real estate agent before stepping into the market? My guests today are Rebecca Schumacher and Sabrina Lowell. Rebecca is a top producing realtor for Sotheby's International Realty, known for her work with buyers and sellers in some of San Francisco's most prestigious neighborhoods. Sabrina is a financial advisor here at Private Ocean. She is also a principal and the managing partner of our San Francisco office. Thank you both for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, and welcome.
Absolutely.
So Sabrina, I know you can offer your insight on how you guide clients as their financial advisor in their decision to purchase or sell a home. So we'll be looking to you for that. And Rebecca is here to discuss strategies and tactics to have a successful transaction in the San Francisco market, since that is her area of geographical expertise. So I'm going to turn to you first, Rebecca. Tell us about the current real estate market in San Francisco. What are you noticing?
Well, it's just about through the transition from the market of 2020, greatly affected by the pandemic, to what is likely to be, once again, a seller's market in San Francisco. There's been a lot of flux, a lot of random events that don't fit good patterns, such as great properties sitting for a while and less wonderful properties getting multiple offers. And when you see that kind of random behavior, you know you're in a transitioning market. So we are just about to come out of the end of that and be in a seller's market once again.
Great. So, and Sabrina, when you're speaking with clients, I want to turn to you and ask, what kind of guidance do you give them when either purchasing or selling a home? When is it a good financial decision?
Well, I think the first consideration is the timing right? And then beginning to think about, having a clear understanding on what you're willing to spend on a house. So you might have a desired price range and thinking about what that might be. And then, on the high end, you may want to stretch into a home that you may want to grow into. On the lower end, that may be an opportunity to have the flexibility in making a career pivot or be financially free in being work optional. So I think it's really having a clear understanding of what is your price range, and then working with a great agent to determine what is that going to look like and beginning to delve in. Also, in the San Francisco market, I know we'll get into it, but if you're going to go over asking, which is likely, then determining what's that upper band and really thinking about, is that maybe extra 50 or 100,000 at the end, is that going to make or break you over the long term? Probably not, and may actually just get you the deal and get into the house that you want. I think that the other part, just from a pure financial standpoint, we're really looking at the full financial picture to understand all of the various moving parts and pieces. But if you're simply looking at the financial equation of do you rent versus buy, New York Times actually has a great calculator online that runs those numbers as a preliminary step to looking at what might make sense based on purchase price, growth rates, current interest rates, how long you might stay in the house, and other various factors.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to turn back to Rebecca and ask her, what strategies should buyers be aware of when targeting their price point? What do you
You know,
offer?
it really depends on where the market is headed. And their strategy for that is really a function of what the strategy is that the sellers are using at that point in time. And so the kind of market we were in 2020, sellers were not expecting to get their asking price. And buyers could target a range that went higher because they could probably look at properties, for example, that were listed for 3.5 and maybe get it for 3.1. So they could search a broader, wider range. As we move out of that pricing strategy on the seller side, now we're in a point where sellers should be pricing just about where they think it will trade. And unless it's at the very high end, where that pricing is just stratospheric and only a vague pointer to the expected outcome, most of the market, as we move into this kind of market, sellers will be getting the advice to price just about where the data tells them it should be, and maybe a little bit under that. So now the buyer has to be more careful in this kind of market and not have too high a range, or they will find themselves getting interested in a property that's going to go well over the asking price, and it'll become frustrating for them. So they need to have the advice to know what's going on the listing side so that they can adjust their searches on the buy side.
Yeah. So in today's market, Rebecca, just diving a little more into that, do you give advice and prepare buyers to go X% above the list price, or is it really dependent upon the property and the neighborhood and what's happening at that moment?
Well, it's very much dependent upon the factors that you just cited. And there's another wild card in it, and that is, who is the listing agent and what is their MO? Because there are listing agents that consistently price very, very low in all kinds of markets. So we need to know when we're looking at a property listed by one of those agents, because that's a different strategy for the buyer. Is it a trustee sale? Trustee sales are traditionally priced low in an effort to generate many, many offers, so the trustee feels very good about the outcome and there'll be an offer date employed. Or is it a more normal property priced by normal means and will result in something rather reliable for the buyer to bid on?
Well, I know you don't just represent buyers, you represent sellers too. So share with us what you tell sellers when they're getting ready to put their house on the market. What strategy do you suggest that they adopt to get top dollar?
Well, it's all about physical prep. That's the big thing. It's physical prep, one of my favorite topics. And there's just no way to shortcut this. There are sellers who think, I don't need to really make it look that wonderful because people are still going to come in and tear it apart and do their own thing. And that's actually faulty thinking, because the buyers have to see it. They have to see what there is and be able to envision it. And maybe they will change it, but many buyers who are certain they're going to tear it apart and do something else live in it for 5 to 8 years, if not a lifetime, before they do that something else. So it must look good from the start. And it starts with street presence and it goes all the way through the property. It must be immaculate. And if there are dollars being spent to change out any finishes, their agent should be able to give them multiple quotes from various vendors and think through the payback for that, because those dollars shouldn't be spent unless the payback is at least twice what the seller spends to change out that finish. So the easy ones are, paint and floor refinishing and landscaping. It gets more complex when you think about kitchen upgrades, bath upgrades. And one of the ones that's not expensive and is so often missed are light fixtures.
Oh, yeah.
You can take a really lovely residence and have
Yeah.
very average light fixtures, or take the same residence and put really stunning high-end, or not high-end expensive, but looks high-end light fixtures, and completely elevate the property and surprise everyone.
And I imagine there's also an opportunity, or you suggest to sellers to stage their property, to actually bring in furniture to create a certain look that maybe they aren't capturing.
I'd just love to weigh in on that because I worked with Rebecca on a sale of a property for a client. And what was just amazing in that regard was she not only brought in stagers, and the client was initially, I think, a bit hesitant around that, but also an architect to design 3 different options. So if this were maybe an older couple or a family, or or a mid-range option, sort of to be able for a buyer to really understand what would it be like, based on their own personal circumstances, to live in this property. And then on the staging front, the client did agree, and actually once the staging came in, said, "Gosh, I really wish that we would have had this done while we were living in it so that we could enjoy it." So there's a lot of value there.
Yeah.
We hear that a lot, Sabrina. I wish I had this vision to do this with it. People are reluctant to spend the money on staging. My rule of thumb on staging is it generally does one of 2 things. It either makes it possible for the property to sell at all, and or it increases its value by 3 times the investment you make in it. And today, more than ever, with our lack of open homes and lack of brokers tours because of the COVID situation, buyers have to have something gorgeous to look at online. And without staging, there is nothing gorgeous to look at online. We have dabbled in the realm of virtual staging quite successfully in 2 contexts, but it's not the way to go in a normal market. I've used it on those rare instances where I've put a property up for lease for a really important client. It's not something we like to do much of, but for somebody really special, we will lease a property. And in that case, virtual staging can work. And we also did it during the pandemic. I mean, I canceled a staging the day after London Breed put shelter in place on the map for us. And we couldn't bring the stager in. And we used a virtual stager who is absolutely awesome. And we ended up selling that property to an executive relocating from London who never saw it before she closed escrow.
Wow.
That's the exception.
Well, and that brings also the importance of great pictures, especially in today's world, having a high quality photographer be part of your team, working with your agent who really knows how to showcase your home in today's world, especially since most of that's done on the computer through images. So that's having, great partnerships to make sure that it's represented properly. Right. Well, this is another question. I imagine, just as you said, Sabrina, that when the slight renovations or upgrades that were done for the sale, people decide to stay in it. I imagine, Rebecca, you're also asked many times, should I sell my home or should I remodel my home? So share with me maybe some anecdotes about that experience when you have that conversation with clients.
I had a really, really interesting one about a year. Well, it's been ongoing, but it started maybe a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago. A past client referred me to friends of hers. And when I met with them, they were so frustrated. They were trying to get permits to make some substantial changes to their home that would go outside the envelope just a little bit. and really make the home work a lot better for themselves. And they met with so much direct neighbor resistance that they were discouraged, they were upset, they were angry, and they just wanted me to sell it so they could walk away from it. And it was a great house in a superb block, and it really needed what they wanted to do with it. And I encouraged them not to give up. Because they had purchased it at a great price. It was going to be a fabulous home for their family. And I gave them some tips on prevailing in the discretionary review hearing that their neighbor was bringing them up against, and some ways to work more effectively with their architect to get what they needed. And it worked. I mean, they prevailed. They renovated the house. They're happy. They moved in. And sometimes the answer is not to sell something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so we're talking primarily about primary homes here. At least that's what I think our subject matter is. I want to move to you, Sabrina, and ask, when you work with clients, does a subject of purchasing a second home or investment property come up? And how do you guide clients in that conversation?
It certainly comes up quite frequently. And I always start with, what are your goals? So in thinking about a second property, whether that's a vacation home or a rental property, what are you trying to accomplish? So what's compelling about a second home or a real estate investment? Is it really around the pure return aspect? Is it a place to return to for vacation year over year? Is it an asset to be able to help fund retirement, or maybe a home to pass to your children or heirs? And then once you have that clear vision of what your goal is, then begin imagining yourself and walking through, what would it really be like to play out that scenario. So going back to a vacation home, how do you really like to vacation? Do you like to go to the same place each year, or do you want to have the flexibility? I think a vacation home can sound very compelling, but if you're really someone who likes to vacation in different places, that may not be the best option to buy a vacation home. On the rental side, I think that can be quite compelling from an income generation standpoint, but also who will be in charge of overseeing renters and repairs. And if you're bringing someone else in to help with the oversight and management, factoring that into, how does the property cash flow? The other piece is around family. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients who have kept second homes thinking that their children are going to want this home down the road, and then come to find out that none of the children are necessarily interested in keeping it. So thinking about, what is the purpose of this property, both in the short, mid, but also in the long term. And then that also plays into running the numbers. So based on your own circumstances, the geographic location, running those, and then also some realistic scenarios, especially with rental properties. How often will it really be rented out, or how does vacancy or turnover potentially impact that? And thinking about it as a business. So for this property, what is both the hold strategy as well as the sell strategy?
Yeah, and Rebecca, do you have any insight on investment property purchases? Is that something that you can share any experience about?
Yes, we've represented numerous investors over the years. It could be someone moving very quickly to fulfill their 1031 exchange, or it could be someone simply looking for that long-term appreciating asset, because certainly in San Francisco, it's not going to cash flow for quite a while. And so we help them look for properties that can perhaps later transition what they are. For example, if they buy a 2-unit building, they can, over time, if they choose not to hold it in the manner they thought, sell them off as separate units or convert them to condos. So it's better to have flexibility with the choice of investment property.
Good. Well, I imagine that some of our listeners are in the process of wanting to purchase a new home or sell their home, or probably both. Um, Rebecca, can you give some advice to our listeners about what they should be looking for when they're looking to engage a real estate agent in San Francisco?
Yeah, it's important. It's a different question for sellers versus buyers, but there should be really in-depth neighborhood knowledge. And there are so many things that if someone really knows a neighborhood that are not gathered by just looking at the data. What are the traffic patterns? Where do people go to buy their groceries? What is it really like living in that location? How far away is that fire station that's going to be going off all the time? And how stable is the neighborhood? So that's important, really in-depth knowledge of the neighborhood itself, not just the inventory in the neighborhood. So it really helps if the agent already lives in that part of town and is there, really gets it all the time. But you also need an agent who is willing to dive into the data, because when it comes to setting pricing or making an offer, you need the data as well as the soft part about the neighborhood. The data is probably 80% of pricing a property, and the other 20% is art. And the data is 80% of making an offer, and the other 20% is art. It's the relationship with the people on the other side and how that plays out. So they should look at all of that. But in the end, this is going to be a very intense relationship for a reasonable period of time. And so the communication and the chemistry should be good.
Definitely.
And people should really listen to that in making their decision about who they want to work with.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big life event. And actually both you, Rebecca, and Sabrina share that. You're talking about subject matters, either money or real estate, that can be that can really bring up a lot of emotion, I imagine, in people. And so having a good counselor working or partner working with you can make all the difference. Rebecca, I know that you work with a team, the Schumacher Beggs team. Can you share with me what are the advantages of working with a group or a team?
It's a good question, because teams are becoming more and more prevalent. The work is very demanding. We work 24/7. Our clients expect us to be available nearly 24/7. And with a team, we can divide some of the tasks, not all, and not even many. It depends on the situation. We can divide the task between the person most well suited to serve the client. So there's some listings that I take where I do 100% of everything involved with that listing. And that's also true with some buyers. But there are others where other members of the team might be even a better showing agent for the property than I, because there's a particular demographic that's going to buy this property, and that team member is in that demographic and will be a wonderful showing agent for it. And the same on the flip side for representing buyers. We might have a team member who's demographically more aligned to a particular buyer than one of the senior founding partners. And what I love about our team is that my business partner is of a different generation than I, with a different educational background than mine, with a different corporate background than my corporate background, but we both come from corporate lives before real estate. And so we're constantly complementing the skills of one another, and our team is there to support us. I think the key thing is that one person needs to own the communication with the client. Yeah. And that is probably one of the partners, but not necessarily, depending upon the situation. And that clear, consistent, reliable, timely communication is the thing that a team can provide while allocating some of the tasks to other members.
And Rebecca, if somebody wants to dive deeper or get in contact with you, how do you suggest they reach out to you?
Any way they want, because I answer texts, I answer the phone, I deal with emails.
Yeah.
Just reach out. It's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And I don't want you to give your phone number on the podcast, but what is your website? Where should people visit you to find that contact information?
Yeah, it's a bit of a spelling bee, but it's the two partners' names. So it's schumacherbegs.com. That's SCHUMACHER, and Beggs, BEGGS.com. That's
Great.
us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for all of your insight. And Sabrina, always appreciate you joining these conversations. And if you want to get in touch with Sabrina, visit privateocean.com. This podcast will be transcripted and available on our resource tab if you want to learn more. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you both.
Ready to dive in? Visit privateocean.com/podcast for episode transcripts, downloads, additional insights, and more. Have any questions about this episode? Send us an email at poteam@privateocean.com.